things are heating up in the Middle East, and a lot of pressure is being brought to bear on Israel. Following the war with Hezbollah during the summer of 2006, Arab leaders became very vocal about their belief that there will be no peace in the Middle East until the problem between Israel and the Palestinian Authority is resolved, or the Palestinian people is resolved. The problem is that this issue is very complicated, and much of the information the typical person has at his or her disposal is inaccurate. Inaccurate information was introduced decades ago, and it has just been brought forward by people who've been, candidly, too lazy to go in and do any digging. It's like a student in a class who refers only to secondary sources and never once goes to primary sources to get information. That's the laziest form of journalism, but you see a lot of it. I want to recommend a book to you. It's written by Joan Peters. It was published about 2 decades ago. The title of it is From Time Immemorial: The Origins of the Arab-Jewish Conflict Over Palestine. Joan Peters set out to write a book to organize and bring forward information on the problem Israel was having with its Arab neighbors and with the Palestinian refugees. And what she discovered was that the facts were entirely different than what the Western media was presenting. Here's an interesting tidbit for you. Probably in the neighborhood of 70% of the people who later claimed to be refugees from Israel in 1948 never even saw an Israeli soldier. They were told to leave, in many cases forced to leave, by political and religious leaders who told them that the Arab nations were going to destroy the young nation Israel and drive the Jews into the sea, and that they would be able to return within a few days to reclaim all of their land, plus the spoils left behind by the Jews. Well, things didn't turn out that way. Now, I'm not going to get into a lengthy discussion about how many refugees, Arab refugees, there were in 1948, but I will say this. The largest number anyone has been able to come up with is 500,000. That is, no more than 500,000 Arab refugees left Israel in 1948. Now, as I said, no one knows for sure what the number is, and part of the reason is that the Arab leaders would not allow a census. But another part of the reason is a lot of people who were not in Israel prior to 1948 were added to the refugee list because they were thrown out of Arab nations, because they were malcontents there. They just were thrown into what is now called the Palestinian population. Here's an interesting fact, one that will surprise you if you don't already know it. There were more than 850,000 Jewish refugees from Arab nations in 1948. Now here's a fact. The Jewish refugees, many of them didn't leave because they wanted to leave. Their homes had been in these Arab nations for in some cases, thousands of years. They were forced to leave or they were going to lose their lives. And they left behind everything they owned. So here are the facts. There were more than 850,000 Jewish refugees. There were no more than 500,000 Arab refugees. Another fact. The Jewish refugees left behind assets that were worth many times more than the assets left behind by Arab refugees. If equity had anything to do with the situation in the Middle East, the Arab nations would write the people of Israel a check for hundreds of billions of dollars to make up for their net loss. Folks, if you think this is a problem that is new and one that is not well understood by leaders in the Middle East, then you would be mistaken. Let me read a quote to you from King Hussein of Jordan, the late King Hussein of Jordan. This is from a talk he gave in 1960. And this is his quote. Since 1948, Arab leaders have approached the Palestine problem in an irresponsible manner. They have used the Palestine people for selfish political purposes. This is ridiculous, and I could say even criminal. Yet he understands what's going on. Let me read to you another quote, one that should really interest you. This is from Khalid al-Azam, who was Syria's prime minister after 1948, and this quote appears in his memoirs published in 1972. Since 1948, it is we who demanded the return of the refugees, while it is we who made them leave. We brought disaster upon our Arab refugees by inviting them and bringing pressure to bear upon them to leave. We have rendered them dispossessed. We have accustomed them to begging. We have participated in lowering their moral and social level. Then we exploited them in executing crimes of murder, arson, and throwing bombs upon men, women, and children. All this in the service of political purposes. And that's the bottom line. The so-called refugees, Arab refugees from Israel, have been allowed to remain Arab refugees, have been allowed to live in terrible conditions in ghetto camps. Why? So that the Arab leaders would have a festering sore in the Middle East that they could point to and blame Israel for. And it continues to this day. There are other facts that I really can't go into in detail. Israel has even volunteered to spend its own money to build necessary services inside Gaza and the West Bank so as to relieve the plight of these so-called Palestinians. But they have been denied the right to do that by the Arab leaders, including Hamas, I might add, for fear that the Palestinian people would have a more positive attitude toward Israel. They would rather see these people live in destitute conditions than to have Israel come in and help solve their problem. Folks, here's the bottom line. The Arab leaders are right. The Middle East problem will not go away until the problem with Israel is solved. The difficulty with this is, in the minds of many Arabs in the Middle East today, and I don't know how many, but a large number, maybe a minority of the people who live in these Arab countries, but a large number, they don't believe the problem with Israel will be solved or can be solved until there is no Israel, until there are no Jews in the Middle East. Folks, that is the situation we face today. And I would urge you, before you form opinions about this issue, you ought to go do a little digging. Do some research, because what you're going to discover is this. The facts are not being revealed in the media today. You're going to have to go out and find the information for yourself. I've given you a few bits of information today. There's a lot more. I recommended the book by Joan Peters, From Time Immemorial. Start by reading that book. If you can't buy it in a bookstore because it's 2 decades old, go to a library. You should be able to get it there. But get yourself informed, because this issue is probably the most important issue our generation will ever face. And the way the world treats the nation Israel is critical. All the promises that came to the Christian world were brought to us through Abraham's descendants, through Isaac and Jacob, the Jews. And their homeland is Israel. We cannot afford to participate in the destruction of the Israeli homeland. And folks, that's what this peace process, from the Arab point of view, is all about. Now, it may not be true for Jordan, because it looks like there is a real working peace with the people of Jordan. But I can't say that that's altogether true about the peace treaty with Egypt. I can say this, though. Israel is in a desperate situation. And we cannot afford to turn our backs on Israel at this critical juncture.